Hello, it's Cheryl Miller here from Sense of Whimsy in South Australia. Today I'm going to work through the creative process for this project. We had to create for the Stamping Sunday design team, and the theme was the Weatherman. Now I've had this stamp set, Kindest Expressions, for a while, and I wanted to use this beautiful sentiment, Sending Sunshine and Rainbows. Now I don't have any rainbow stamp sets, so I elected to create my own using the rainbow colours Poppy Parade, Pumpkin Pie, Daffodil Delight, Granny Apple Green, Azure Afternoon, Gorgeous Grape and Berry Burst. To create the actual rainbow, I'm going to use the Stylish Shapes dies, and in particular the circular dies, and I have die cut one of each of the sizes just out of plain basic white cardstock. And then, because the Sending Sunshine and Rainbows sentiment is quite large, I've elected to create a square card. So I have a piece of basic white card that is in centimetres, 11.5 centimetres square, or in inches that works out to about 4.5 if you want to create or attempt to create the same card. The sizing doesn't really matter because it's not going to fit in a standard envelope. I'm going to create my rainbow over to the right hand side, and I figured I might need a frame because it's going to be hard to stop and start a rainbow. So I've picked the Delicate Forest dies, and this beautiful frame sort of fits around the Sending Sunshine and Rainbows, so we will use that. Now I've die cut one out of black, and as you can see it doesn't quite fit on the square piece of card, so I'll have to cut it with my paper snip. So I'm going to stretch it out by cutting it in half. I'll just snip it at the bottom, and then I'll snip it at the top in line with the leaves. So I think I'll come down and we'll take this leaf here and I'll just cut that one, and then I will come across and cut the other side, and I'll just shape this leaf to fit. So there we go, that's both halves of the black cardstock done. So one will fit down onto this side and the other one is going to fit onto this side. We'll have a little gap top and bottom, but that'll be fine. I just needed to frame where the rainbow is going to stop and start. So the Sending Sunshine and Rainbows fits in the middle here, and I could stamp it onto separate cardstock and then fussy cut it, but it's going to cover up too much of the rainbow in the background. So I think a better way to do this would be to heat emboss it, and then the rainbow can show through from behind the words. So I've got my white embossing powder in a tub. I'll also need a Versamark ink pad and an embossing buddy, and of course I'll need a heat tool. So I've got those all ready to go, and we will now go ahead and ink up our stamp and stamp it into the centre. Just got to sort of roughly work out where. I am going to have something along the bottom, so we'll put it a little bit higher than the centre. I've used my embossing buddy all over the piece, and now I'll ink that up with Versamark and try and remember where I said I was going to stamp that. Short attention span here. Around about there, I think. Hopefully that's not too high. And that looks pretty well inked. So now we can go ahead and dip that into our embossing powder, or tip it all over if you're working out of the little tub. Tap off any excess powder by tapping on the back, and that looks pretty good. I think I've got pretty good coverage. So now go ahead and heat that. I'm trying to tip this so you can see it heat as I go. You can see it's going shiny, and I just work along the words basically. I don't sort of wave my heat tool all over the place. I just methodically work along the words and try and get all of the edges. But I know I always miss the edges, so then I'll just go back around the edges and make sure that they're done. And that looks pretty good. It looks pretty shiny. There's no dull bits. Yes, you can just see that, I think. So let's have a look at whether I've got that at the right height for my frame. I think it is just a fraction high, but I still think I can make that work okay. Something like that. As long as we can still see the sentiment, we're all good. So now we'll need to work on our rainbow. Now I'm going to put something ground related down the bottom, I'm not sure what yet, but the rainbow will go around here to the right hand side. I have lots of blocks here because when I'm doing ink blending, I like to put my ink onto a block rather than scrub my brush onto the top of the soft ink pad surface. I am a little heavy-handed when I ink blend, so this is a safer option for me. So I've got the first rainbow colour is red, and I'm using Poppy Parade. And I'm just going to use this circle as a mask and work around the edge over the embossing, and I'll just be careful to be quite gentle when it comes to the bottom part so that it blends in nicely. Right, we'll start off by just taking the excess ink off, and we can do this directly onto that circle mask, and then just bring the blending brush just slightly over the edge of the circle, directly over the embossing, and just create a blended edge around that circular shape. Oops, a little bit of red ink down there. We'll have to cover that over with some ground related stamps or something. And then I'll polish that off with a tissue so to take the ink off the top of the embossing. I just want to check what it looks like. It's a bit pinky, but if we apply another colour over the top afterwards, that should come off. Next colour is orange, working on the rainbow colours, which is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So next up is pumpkin pie. And I'll just do the next size circle down, put it in position, and do exactly the same thing. So this, being a lighter colour, is not going to obscure the red, but it will blend in a little bit, but not take away that line where the red started. So again, just being a little gentle down towards the bottom, so I end up with a blended bottom edge. That looks pretty cool. Let's polish that off and see how that comes up now, because I need to make sure that sentiment's going to pop, and that's looking pretty good. It's popping now. So next colour is yellow. We're going to use Daffodil Delight for the yellow, and it'll be the same process but using the next size circle down from those Stylish Shapes die cuts that I have aside here. So that's this one. So exactly the same process. We'll pop that in place, pick up our ink with our brush, and work just around the edge of the circle. Just always take off that little excess blob before you start, so that doesn't end up on your project. And that looks great, blends really nicely into the orange, but you can still see the line of the circle. Yep, so I've got more ink there. I'm a messy stamper, but that does, you can really see that sentiment coming out now. That looks great. All right, next colour up is green. So I've got Granny Apple Green in another block. As I said, if you don't have this many blocks, just clean your block off in between. But I may use some of these colours afterwards, so I'm just putting them off to the side for the moment. I've got ink all over my fingers. I suppose that's pretty unavoidable. So we'll do Granny Apple Green in the same way. I'm just being very careful to hold on to that circle quite firmly so it doesn't slip. So it looks a little awkward working with the brushes in this way, but it seems to be working okay. So we're blending that into the yellow a little bit, but still keeping the line of the circle. And that looks pretty good. Oh, it's coming together nicely. Love the rainbow colours. Azure Roofed Afternoon is going to be my blue shade. Nice bright blue. And the next circle down, this is the second smallest circle. And again, we'll just pop a line in. I'm making this line a little bit larger because I'm going to run out of circles in a minute. So again, now this one is pretty hard to get the blue, the blobby bits off in the centre of the circle. So you'll notice I took them off on the scrap paper off to the side. That looks pretty good. You don't need it to be too dark because the other colours are quite light. But yeah, the sentiment is really starting to pop now. So I'm happy that that's going to show quite well. The last smallest circle, I'll use with what is supposed to be indigo. I'm using Gorgeous Grape. I'm not really sure that's indigo, but I love the purple shade, so we'll go with Gorgeous Grape. We've got this very small circle which is going to be a bit tricky to hold on to and also get our ink nicely. So I'm really having some control over the top of that blending brush by holding on to the head of the brush. Oops, oops, another oops. I've got a little bit of excess ink off to the edge here, but thankfully my black frame should cover that with a bit of luck. Just running with it. Last colour is violet. Is it violet? I think so. But this is Berry Burst. I'm not really even sure if this is violet, but anyway. I think this will be a nice little pinky red purple splot. Now, there's no mask if we've just got a colour in this circle in the middle, so be very, very gentle. Make sure you take off all that excess. The Berry Burst is quite a strong colour and mine is very inky. That looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. What a stunning little rainbow. And the sentiment does seem to be coming up quite well, except over here where we've still in the white area. Now, that's going to be sky. I could use blue, but I'm thinking it's sunshine and rainbows, so let's add some sunshine with the yellow. And the yellow will blend nicely into the red and won't really turn it into a different colour. Go a bit orangey, but the blue would turn it purple, which is not the effect. Look at all these. I'm so scatterbrained, but those circles can be put aside and used for masks again, or you could colour them up fully and use them in another project. So using the yellow, I'm just going to go over the remainder of that sentiment, filling in that gap, and then once we polish that off, it should start to show. Now it's still a bit light and the red's sort of been a bit obscured. So let's add some more red. We'll bring that mask back in and use the Poppy Parade again, just to intensify that red a little bit, which is also going to make the sentiment pop a little bit more. It doesn't need very much, just a little bit. Yeah, that looks much better. Okay, so I'm going to, it's got the red on the top, but now if you rub over it with that yellow brush without any extra ink, it will just take the red off the top of the embossing. And then once you polish it up, now you can really see that sentiment quite well. Now I am going to frame this with a darker ink, so that will also help make that sentiment really pop. And then adding those frames will really draw your eye to the center of the card. So now we're going to add something along the bottom. So I'm going to use the Delicate Forest stamp set, and I've pulled out this spray of leaves. I was going to use this one, but I thought it might have been a little bit too heavy and dense for this lovely light card. So I'm going to go with the lighter, or the more spaced out image of the leaves. I'm going to use some shaded spruce as green foliage. It's a nice dark colour. In fact, I might do a test stamp because this is a very juicy ink pad and it may be a little too dark. It's not really showing as green, so yep, I think stamped off might be better. So we'll do some stamping, second generation stamping just along the bottom here. So I'm doing a really light stamp off, so that there's still quite a bit of ink on the stamp. And I am going to try and cover those little inky bloopers that I made with my finger along the bottom. So now we need to bring this up a little bit further. So I don't want to bring it up too far, so I'm going to clean the stamp off and I'll just ink up a portion of the stamp, make sure that it's dry, the top portion. So it's just those few top leaves. And as long as you have cleaned off your stamp really well and made sure it's dry, you should be able to just ink up a few leaves and add them without making marks on the rest of your card. Just make sure your stamp is really clean before you try this though. So there we go. I've added in just a few extra little bits, and that is my piece along the bottom. Now I'm going to use Pretty Peacock as well, and Pretty Peacock is sort of going to be my blending colour around the edge, but I think that this bottom area does need to be a little bit more filled in. It's still a bit sparse. So on my desk I had the Elements of Text stamp, which is proving to be one of my favourites. And in our last projects for class we used this long text stamp. So I think we'll use the same one today, and I'll just stamp it along the bottom with the Pretty Peacock ink over the top of the leaves. And I don't need to stamp that one off. That one is a really fine stamp, so it's not going to be too overpowering. So we'll just stamp it along the bottom at different heights so that it looks a little random. I can't actually even really read what it says, so it doesn't really matter. It's just something to fill it in. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to add some shading along the bottom as well, and I'm going to use the Shaded Spruce ink along the bottom and then the Pretty Peacock ink around the top where the sky might be. So the Shaded Spruce is a very green ink, and the Pretty Peacock, once you ink blend it like this, is slightly bluer, so that will work for the sky. I'm a little worried about this gap here underneath the rainbows. I'm not sure that I can adequately fill it with the green ink without it being too overpowering, but we'll try. So I think I'm going to have to fill it in with some more of that stamp. So we'll pull out the Shaded Spruce ink pad again, and again I'm just going to ink up a portion of the stamp, just these top few leaves, and add them in just in that little gap. So we'll go ahead and do that. So just the top portion, the rest of the stamp is very clean, and we will add just a few extra leaves in underneath the bottom of that rainbows. Yep, another one can go in here just with the top 3 leaves. Again, as long as you clean your stamp off thoroughly before you just use a portion of it like this, you won't get the extra leaves showing. So now I'm going to re-add some more of the Shaded Spruce. I want it to be a little bit darker. That with the dark frames down the side, I need this bottom piece to be quite dark as well, or it's going to look a bit odd. So we'll do into the corners, and that looks pretty good. So now the Pretty Peacock ink can go around the outside, and that is also going to cover up some of my other inky bloopers, hopefully, as well as the die cut trees. So we'll just quickly lightly go. You don't want it to be very heavy, it's meant to be blue, so very light minty blue colour around the edge. And then underneath where the tree frame is going to go, I want it to be quite dark. There are holes or see-through segments of those dies, and so I don't really want it to be full-on rainbow coming through the trees. I want it to be a shadow, so we'll add some dark ink down the edges. You can see a lot of the ink, my ink, goes off onto the scrap paper, and that allows me to get a really nice blended edge. That looks pretty good. Let's polish off our sentiment and see how we're looking. It looks pretty good, and it's covered over most of my inky bloopers. I'm not totally happy with how some of the ink hasn't lifted off the sentiment, especially down where this Shaded Spruce is. So I'm taking a blender pen, and I've made sure that it's clean, and I'm just going over those letters. Now, this is a liquid, and we've got a dye ink underneath, so wherever that liquid hits the dye, which is inevitable, it's going to leave a little mark. It's going to shift it a little bit, but I don't actually mind that. It looks like a little drop shadow. So I'll just go over the entire rainbows word down where that green ink has sort of impacted the embossing powder and is not coming off. Shaded Spruce is a very intense ink, and I think that's looking much better. You can see it's lifted the ink off. Now I'm going to go ahead, and now that I've got that little drop shadow around the rainbows, I think everything needs to be done. So I'll put this on fast forward, and I'll just go through and do all of the words so that they all look the same. They all have that little mark that the blender pen leaves around the edge, which does actually highlight the letters. And as long as you're not too heavy-handed with that blender pen, it works really well. Gets any excess ink off. Let's have a closer look. You can see that looks pretty good. It's made the sentiment really pop. So let's have a look at what the frame looks like around the outside. That looks pretty good. I think it needs darker ink down underneath these trees, and we'll need to add something at the bottom. I did die cut some extra foliage from the Delicate Forest dies when I did this frame, and I think they'll fit nicely along the bottom there. And then I've also thought about that the sentiment really doesn't quite do it for me yet, so I'm going to add some drop shadow. Now I'm going to use very light Stampin' Blends. I've got light Petal Pink and light Balmy Blue. Now you don't have to do this is just Cheryl being Cheryl, but what I'm doing is applying, using the bullet end of the Stampin' Blend, I'm adding a slight drop shadow along one side of each of the letters. Now I'm trying not to go over the white embossing powder. These Stampin' Blends are quite light, so that it's not really going to matter if you do, but it just adds a very subtle extra line around these words. Now over the yellow, orange, green bits, I'm using the Petal Pink, and then I'll use the Balmy Blue over the letters that sit over the green, blue and purple. It's a little more intense than the Petal Pink, but looks quite good. So that it does make it pop quite a bit more, especially down where that rainbow goes into the green. So now I will add that extra colour that I was talking about, the extra shading down the side with the Pretty Peacock and my blending brush. You can see I'm making that quite dark, but it's still got quite a nice blend. And the tree frame will sit really nicely over that, and it'll just make it look like it's more in shadow down along the sides. So down both sides, a little bit into the corners, and then I'll take whatever ink is left in my Daffodil Delight blending brush and just blend that edge in a little bit more, polish it off with a tissue, and look at that pop once you polish it off. And we are in the home straight now. If you're still with me, thank you for staying with me. I'm going to glue all this together. So I'll need my silicone mat because glue will go outside the edges of the card when I glue these pieces on. This particular die does have little pop-up leafy bits, so I'm just going to go through and raise those a little bit so I know not to put glue on them when I put my glue onto the back of this piece. So they all just pop out. I'm using my Take Your Pick tool, and I'll go through and do both sides. Now we are at a stage where we can go ahead and glue these down. Now I do have a glue press. I find it much easier to work with, especially when you want to add those little tiny dots. Now I have the multi-purpose liquid glue in the glue press, and you can see it does allow you to make a really fine little line of glue and little fine dots where you just need a dot. You could use the applicator for the liquid glue pen, the liquid glue bottle. Just be very gentle so that you don't end up with too much glue everywhere. And then that just pops down onto the edge of the card. Let's pop that in a little bit. And go ahead and do the other side. You can see why I'm using the silicone mat, because I will get glue outside everywhere, and I do not want this to stick to my paper. So again, little fine bits of glue. You could use a glue sponge if that's your method of applying glue to these little fine pieces, just with a bit of sponge on your silicone mat and then dab the glue onto the back of the piece. That works as well. And I'm just trying to avoid those little leaves that will pop up. And then this one can go down on this side. I'm just trying to avoid covering up too much of the words if I can. Alright, so now we've got this little extra bit here. I'm going to cut that off, but I'll make sure that everything else is stuck down to start with. Let's pop that back down there. And you will probably need to set this aside to dry. I'm just going to chop this little bit off here so it's not a square, on my piece. Now once this is dry, we can go ahead and trim off the bits from the back. So just flip it over, and I just use my snips and just trim off all the bits. You could try and use your paper trimmer if you wanted to, but I just find the snips are just as easy, and you've got that distinct line to follow. So just go around the entire piece. Any extra, like that little piece there, can just come off. It's going to come off anyway, it's too small. And then this side, and then the bottom. And that's it. Once you flip it over, you get the final effect, which is pretty good. Now I do have those bits that I'm going to stick along the bottom. So let's go ahead and do that as well with little bits of glue. Just tiny bits. We do not want glue everywhere. And same for this one. And that one can go in there. And again, they just get snipped off along the back side once they're dry. These aren't really quite dry, probably should leave them a little bit longer than I have. But that just adds a little bit of extra framing along the bottom of the card. So now I'm going to pop that up onto a Lost Lagoon panel. I think that was 11.8 in metric, and then onto a folded card which is 13 centimetres by 26 centimetres folded in half. I've popped up all those little leaves with my Take Your Pick tool. I'll put an insert, I'll decorate that with another little rainbow on the inside, and that is my card done. Thank you for sticking with me if you're still here. I hope you have enjoyed this video today. This is the finished card, and I will show you what I did with the inside. I used a sentiment out of the Delicate Forest. Thank you very much for being with me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.